Hello everybody. I hope that you are all doing extremely well. We are coming up on, gosh, I don't even know what week of quarantine it is, but it is our virtual learning week number 4. So we are getting very close to your AP exam. So remember, your AP exam is on May the 18th, so that puts us about 21 days out, or 3 weeks from this point. So Monday, May 27th, your AP exam is 3 weeks from today. It'll be here a lot sooner than you guys realize. So we should be we're going to be spending these next 3 weeks finishing up reviewing Unit 5, 6, and 7, because that's all that's going to be on your test is Units 1 through 7. You guys should keep watching those review videos from College Board on their YouTube site. And then also we're going to continue to look at FRQs and doing some practice with that. My hope is that we can get through 5, 6, and 7 a little bit early and then use the last week to simply focus on writing FRQs. So that's my plan. Unit 5 is very large, so we're not going to be done with Unit 5 this week. We'll probably wrap it up next Wednesday. Today we're just going to do a very short Unit 5 content review, and we're going to focus on reviewing for our experimental design FRQ, which we know we're going to have one. So that's going to be the bulk FRQ that you guys have. The longer one is going to be over experimental design. So we're going to go over just a little bit of content knowledge today from Unit 5, and we're also going to look at experimental design, reviewing independent, dependent variable, that kind of thing. Okay, so let's jump into our Unit 5 review. So Unit 5 was land and water use. So we went over, basically this was the agriculture and aquaculture unit. So we talked about meat production, we talked about crop production, we also talked about like irrigation. So that's what we're going to be reviewing now. And this was a massive unit, so there's a lot of information to get through. Okay, so today is Monday, April 27th. We're just going to be going over Tragedy of the Commons today, which was, I think, a concept that a lot of you did really well with. And also, I think, just talking about some of the effects of agriculture as well. Okay, so really quickly, let's review the Tragedy of the Commons. So this suggests that the individuals will use shared resources in their own self-interest rather than in keeping with the common good, thereby depleting the resources. So remember, a commons area is an area that's not, it's basically like public land. Like you can use it at your will, you don't have to pay for it. So the idea behind this, on the left-hand side, we've got a commons where you can bring your sheep to graze for free. Okay, so what happens is, because people don't have to pay or invest anything to keep up the land, they'll bring as many sheep as they want, and they'll let their sheep graze as much as possible so that they can get the sheep fat, sell the sheep, have the wool, whatever. So it's an economic benefit to yourself with no cost because you don't have to spend anything to keep it up. Now on the right hand side, we've got what was the commons area. Now it's cut into like 9 sections, and each farmer is responsible for paying for each section. So now they have to rent the land, and that's the only land that they get for their sheep. So what happens is, you see there's a lot more green on the right hand side, because suddenly if those farmers let those sheep overgraze and exploit that land, they're not going to get any more, right? It's going to cost them money because they have to pay to rent the land, and they have to make sure that the land is producing enough vegetation for their sheep in a sustainable manner. So basically, if we don't have to pay for it and we don't have to worry about it affecting us economically, chances are we will exploit common areas. And remember, the common areas in the world that are most exploited right now for us are our atmosphere, right? We're pumping a lot of CO2 into the atmosphere. A lot of big companies are pumping CO2 into the atmosphere, creating global warming. Also our oceans. Oceans are common areas that are exploited. And land, of course, too. Land is a little bit different because we do, especially here in the United States, we split up land. A lot of land is privately owned. So that's a little bit different, but definitely 2 exploited common areas are our oceans and our atmosphere. We're going to talk a little bit today about clear cutting, which is just the method of basically cutting down every single tree you see in an area. So it can be economically advantageous, but it does lead to soil erosion, increased soil and stream temperatures, and flooding. Okay, so let's think about why clear cutting would lead to these. So again, clear cutting is just kind of a method of deforestation where you go in and you cut out large patches of trees, like everything in the area, it's gone. Leads to soil erosion because one of the things that helps prevent soils from eroding are the roots of trees. So tree roots help kind of anchor soil in place and prevents that erosion. Increased soil and stream temperatures. Why? Because trees provide shade, right? They reduce the amount of radiation that's reaching the ground and heating up those streams. So they provide shade, and also warmer waters tend to lack dissolved oxygen, and we're going to take a look at that today too. But it's just something to think about. And also flooding. So increased flooding because you have more soil erosion, and again, you just don't have those trees there with their roots providing an anchor and providing kind of a buffer between those overflowing creeks and whatnot. Forest trees do contain, forests contain trees that absorb pollutants and store carbon dioxide. Remember, trees are carbon sinks. They're natural carbon sinks. They need CO2 for photosynthesis, so they absorb it and they hold on to it. When we cut down trees, we release a lot of CO2. Not only do we release CO2 that's stored in the trees, but also we reduce the capacity for CO2 to be absorbed from the atmosphere. Okay, and then the cutting and the burning of trees releases that CO2. And remember, you got to think back to your nutrient cycles, right? Your biological cycles that we learned about back in Unit 1 and 2, which we did a while ago. So make sure you guys remember those. You had nitrogen, water, carbon, all of those, but CO2 is a part of your carbon cycle. And then this is a picture of what clear cutting looks like. So you can see the forest all around, and they've gone in and they have cut out just every single thing they see. They don't leave anything behind. And remember, there's different methods of forestry that we'll get to in the very end of this unit when we talk about sustainability. But there's different methods, but this one is just really go in, cut it down, be done with it. Okay. A review really quick of something called the Green Revolution. So that was basically just kind of when agriculture became more industrialized. So there was increased food production, and then along with that, we could get more food production because of things like genetically modified crops that are resistant to pesticides, herbicides, drought resistant. Also larger farm machinery, meaning that you can go from, like a single person or 2 people operation just doing it by hand or relying on, slave labor, to actually having large machinery that will do a lot of the work for you. New fertilization methods, with technology, new irrigation methods, and also the use of pesticides. So once pesticides were invented and you could kill all the pests that were eating the crops, you could get a higher crop yield. The mechanization of farming can increase profits. So when we talk about mechanization, we talk about large farm machinery. And it can also increase efficiency. So, if you got large machines that can do all the work for you, you're going to be bringing in a higher crop yield, which means more money, which is an economic benefit, right? Remember the difference between environmental and economic. And drawback is that it can also increase reliance on fossil fuels. So obviously you've got that large farm machinery. It's going to take diesel gas or gasoline to run it, and so you're pumping more CO2 into the atmosphere. So this is a really good example of like an FRQ they could give you that, says, explain benefits and drawbacks, or one of those scenarios where you'd have to be like devil's advocate. So you could say, on this hand, the Green Revolution lets you increase food production, people having more access to food. It's good for the economy if they ask for economic benefits, but then drawbacks would be, an increase in CO2 and a reliance on farm machinery. So agricultural practices that cause environmental damage include tilling, slash and burn farming, and then the use of fertilizers. So on the left-hand side, we see tilling, and on the right-hand side, we have our slash and burn. So tilling is basically when they just go through and kind of almost like rough up the soil a little bit so that you can plant your crops. This leads to soil erosion really quickly. A lot of times when they use, especially that large machinery where you till up your cropland, it basically makes the land kind of barren. Like once you go through all that topsoil and you till it up like season after season, it gets to a point where you can't really use it anymore. And that's why, if you guys ever heard of like the Dust Bowl that happened, I think it was in the 30s in the Midwest, where they were doing a lot of this tilling and they just kind of destroy the topsoil. And so when the winds came in, it kind of kicked up all of that loose dust, and it was just a terrible time. People had dust in their houses. They were having, lung issues. It caused a lot of problems. Slash and burn farming. When you go in and you slash and you burn an area to clear it for farming, one, you're losing your trees, so you go back to deforestation issues, disruptions in your carbon cycle. And two, a lot of times this is used in the rainforest, where, remember, the soils are not great. So a lot of times people will use the slash and burn method to be able to farm for a little while, but it doesn't last very long because they can only get 1 or 2 good seasons out of it because they deplete the soil of all of its nutrients, and so it's not very good farmland. And then the use of fertilizers, we know that fertilizers, while they might be good for the soil, they can run off into our waterways and lead to a decrease in dissolved oxygen, because remember, those are nutrients for the bacteria that will eat algae, and that goes back to all of that dissolved oxygen and the BOD that we talked about right before we left for our coronavirus quarantine. Okay, so keep those things in mind. We actually you guys did a cost-benefit analysis of the slash and burn farming, and that was not too long ago, so that should be kind of fresh in your memory. Okay, so that's all we're going to go over today for Unit 5. You're not going to have an assignment today in relation to this, because I feel like this is kind of easier stuff, so I feel like you guys will be okay. The Tragedy of the Commons, we did it twice because it pops up in the beginning and it pops up in Unit 5. Remember our little M&M lab that we did where you guys had to fish your fish out of the ocean. And then we're going to talk more about agriculture and water as we move in through sustainability in this unit, and we'll do some actual content practice with that. But I just wanted to get this out of the way because, like I said, Unit 5 is a really long unit, and I don't want to spend, more than 5 days on it, so that we can get in 6 and 7 as well, and then do some more FRQ practice, because again, your AP test is coming up in 3 weeks. All right, so thank you for sticking with me through this. I'm going to link a video to your experimental design video as well, so go ahead and go watch that, and then your independent practice for the day, or your assignment for the day, will be looking at independent and dependent variable. If you guys have any questions, let me know.